Hello and welcome to the Voice It podcast, a backstage pass into the lives of people in the Clare Valley and the mid-north of South Australia who've started businesses from scratch and have turned them into a success. I'm Annabelle Homer. All I can say is wow. The story you're about to hear will give you goosebumps. It will blow your mind. It will make you appreciate the comforts in life. This is a story of hope, courage, hard work and sheer determination. Tim Siv has all these qualities. You may know him as the local pharmacist in the Clare Valley with his big smiley face plastered on the shop front in the main street. But there's more to Tim than meets the eye. Way more. Tim is a refugee kid.
I know the stories where Mum said like they camped in a little home one night and it was pitch black and like Mum put me in a little hammock and everyone was sleeping on the ground. Next morning they woke up, the whole house was full of dead bodies. You slept with dead bodies for the night and you didn't even know it.
He tells a story of his family fleeing the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia during the late 70s, facing death numerous times at gunpoint, starvation and slave labour. Tim was born in the middle of it. He wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for a bag of fish. Tim takes you back to Cambodia, to the refugee camp in Thailand, and then to their new life in Australia. But then his life takes a turn in high school, a turn which led him on a path to success and out of poverty. It's an inspirational tale of someone who started with nothing and now has something. A truly successful career which he's built from the ground up, and a good and comfortable life, while still giving back to the place where life began through his work with New Hope Cambodia. This is a two-part series. In this episode, you'll hear about life in Cambodia and the sheer horrors of war and his early life in Australia. Enjoy this extraordinary first part of the journey with Tim Siv. Where should we start, Tim? Because this is a story that's of a mammoth proportion.
Yes, it is. Let's start with basically a rundown on the regime. Some people know about Pol Pot and some people know about the Khmer Rouge. I spoke to you yesterday and you sort of generally had an idea of what happened. And that's, I guess that's the case with a lot of people out there listening. They've heard of Cambodia, they've heard of the horrific war that happened with the killing fields and everything else. Now, we were a part of that.
And this is during the 70s?
Correct. So, between 1975 and 1980, basically there was a guerrilla army that came through Cambodia. The guerrilla army was led by a guy named Pol Pot. Pol Pot's ideation of a society was to riddle everyone who was educated and get rid of anyone who was educated and run a country of peasants and farmers and people who were considered uneducated. Basically, anyone who had a degree in anything, doctors, teachers, nurses, anyone in business, anyone who had any sort of runnings with that were literally executed. So when Pol Pot came through Cambodia, he basically told, and at the time my parents were in Phnom Penh, which is the capital of Cambodia, and at the time my two older brothers were with him. I wasn't born yet, and they were told to leave this city. So a city of, probably 3 million people. So we're told, right, you got to get out at gunpoint. You need to leave your homes. You need to come back after a few days because we need to make sure you guys are safe. Everyone didn't know what was going on. It was just imagine us now with this guerrilla army coming through. You're told to leave your home, pack up whatever you can and leave with your families.
Where do you go?
Where do you go? They've been told, go to the countryside, leave the city. So 3 million people trying to get out of the city. At the time, Mum and Dad had a little cart or like a little motorcycle, and so they packed everything, pots and pans and whatever they could, and left the house.
And your two brothers?
And my two brothers.
So there's 4 of you?
So 2 brothers at the time.
4 of you on this
correct.
Motorcycle though?
Mum, Dad and my 2 brothers, 2 older brothers. So on basically they could only push it because it was bumper to bumper with people trying to get out. So Mum said to me, and Mum tells me the story, that over a day you would move probably a few hundred metres, because that was how congested it was in trying to, could you imagine everyone trying to pack all their things and trying to get out of this city?
Would have been such panic though, because there was that element of get out,
Yeah.
and then you're only moving 100 metres per day. That would have made it even worse.
Yeah. So in the heat, so Cambodia is quite warm. So sitting in the blistering heat, it was very exhausting. So Mum and Dad were, they were uneasy about what was going on. And so at the time, Mum had packed up all her jewellery, sewed all her jewellery into her clothes. She already knew something was happening. Dad packed up whatever he could. He had some IDs from back in the day when he was cleaning and things like that. He was a teacher. So my old man was a teacher at a school. He was a principal at a high school, at an actual school. And so he was always cautious of what was going on.
So he was at risk of being executed.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
They basically walked out of the city. There were certain checkpoints along the way. The Khmer Rouge would actually set some checkpoints, and they would ask people, what did you do? How come you're leaving? Rah, rah, rah. So they're screening people. When Dad came through this checkpoint, they asked him what he did, and he said, I was a cleaner. Here's my card, my ID. Back in the day, I did cleaning. So they let him through, so the family went through. The Khmer Rouge didn't only just take you, they took your family. So at nights, you hear of certain families getting taken away, because at those checkpoints, they remember who you are. And if you were educated, they kept an eye on where you actually camped for that night. And that night, they would take certain soldiers down, and they would take the families and they'll put them on the truck, never to return. So what they did was take these people or these families to the killing fields. So the killing fields was basically big mass graves in the ground, and a lot of them you'll see in Phnom Penh still. And this is where families were taken, and no one knew. So families would just disappear at night. So in the morning, people would take off again, not knowing where families had gone, thinking that people had gone. So along the way, they'd keep walking. And at this stage, Mum and Dad were a little bit cautious. They heard, and we were talking to people, and they said, look, what's happening is educated people are getting executed. So Dad being a teacher, he was recognised by a lot of students. He was recognised by a lot of families. So they took off through the jungle. Instead of sticking to the main road, they actually took off through the jungle. And the jungle was obviously very thick, and it's not as easy to get through. So they camped a lot of the time through the jungle and headed off to... So the aim was to get back to Battambang, which is where our family were from, and back in the country. Actually, Battambang is a country town.
So how far is that from Phnom Penh?
Phnom Penh to Siem Reap was, so I had to go Phnom Penh to Siem Reap, which is about 300 or 400 kilometres, and then from Siem Reap to Battambang was a couple of 100 kilometres by foot.
And most of that through the jungle?
Through the jungle. So I stayed off the main roads.
How did your family survive in the jungle?
The thing is, it became a bartering game. So Mum having jewellery sewed into her clothes, because half the time, some people would get things taken off them at these checkpoints. If you got your pots and pans and clothes and things like that taken off you, at least Mum knew that she still had jewellery to barter and to use for rice and food and things that they require to survive. So there was a checkpoint where Mum told me they had actually taken some clothes off Mum, the kids' clothes, my two older brothers. They were two kids, 3 and 5-year-old. So she was a little bit annoyed, basically went back and said to the soldiers, look, they're kids' clothes, can we have them back?
She's a brave woman.
She was a brave woman. She still is a brave woman now. So I literally loaded up the gun and said, do you really want them back? So she pretty much said, okay, see you later, bye, and left. So they didn't care. They would have shot her right there and then, didn't matter. So, clothes was really technically nothing in the scheme of things. She was like, I'd keep the clothes. I'd rather keep my life. So there are various times during this journey that they should have died, and probably should have died many times over. And so they continued on their way. I remember her telling me one night they settled in, camped, drinking from the river, and then the next morning woke to the sunlight, and there were dead people floating right through the river. There were bodies just flowing through from, obviously, people getting executed and killed, and here was people drinking from this thing the night before because they couldn't see. And it was just, could you imagine like us doing that? I just wouldn't. It's just something you just couldn't imagine. Things like that, you just think, wow, like you pick up and you go again. So you pick up your whole family. Did
she say how much that affected them at the time?
I think it freaks you out.
Well, yeah. But were they becoming so immune to the harrowing things that they were seeing that it was just something else?
I think after a while you'd start to see bodies, and you'd start to see executions, and you start to see families who are dying from starvation, and you start to really just think about you and your family and how you survive. So a story of survival and how we can get to the next point, and where is the next point, and where do we actually get to.
Did they see any of their family or their friends be executed?
Mum and Dad lost a lot of friends, and they lost family members that they don't even know about now, and they know that they disappeared. So I guess that's a hard part about it, is you just keep going and hoping that you and your family survive this thing, and you get to the destination that you get to, if you get to it. Their destination was to get to Battambang and to be safe with the family, the rest of the family, and that was always in the back of Mum and Dad's mind. We've got to get these two boys to the family, and from there, what do we do? So as they trekked on, that the time Mum found out she was pregnant with me, right? Two boys on a journey, pregnant with me. The Khmer Rouge also stopped you at certain points to work, and they made you work in these fields, like digging dirt and working on pretty much a farm.
So slave labour.
Slave labour. You got basically a pot of rice and just as some food to keep you going. And if you couldn't keep going, they'd probably execute you. So because you were too weak. So at certain points, Mum and Dad were working through these peasant farms and things like that.
How did your mum do that when she was pregnant?
Yeah, I know. She's a pretty determined woman. I remember her telling me stories of times when she was so hungry that she was climbing mango trees to pick mangoes, and hoping not to fall down from these mango trees at night and things like that, because you couldn't go and scurry for food, because if you got found out, you'd get shot. She'd say she'd fallen down that many holes. She's gone, she didn't even think I was going to survive because of the fact, the lack of food, malnutrition, and also the number of times she's fallen down these dips and walking in water up to her neck, and at the time you had to sow rice and things like that in the ground, and if you've ever seen rice being grown, it's in a flooded waterways, and you just knee deep in water the whole time. So they had to do this a fair bit in some of the checkpoints, and eventually they got to Battambang, which is where the family were. My uncles and aunties and my grandma was there. It was almost a rest point for them to decide where to go next. The idea was to get to the Thai border, right? The Thai border was probably 100 kilometres away, if that. But during that time, obviously, Mum was due to have birth to me. And I remember telling the story that week, Dad had caught a bag of fish because they lived on the side of the river. And I remember going back and seeing this house and seeing the actual river. And so Dad had basically caught a bag of fish, and so they needed a pair of sterile scissors, because obviously to cut the cord, they didn't have those resources as such. It's all bartering. So Dad had actually swapped a whole bag of fish for a pair of sterile scissors. And
get a pair of scissors from? Who had a pair of scissors?
Well, that's it. There was somebody obviously who had them. And so people in need will always go, look, this is what I've got. It's all whispers and all sorts, and someone's got something, and then all of a sudden it appears, and it's like, well, I'll take your bag of fish, which I need as food, for this pair of sterile scissors. So during that time, I remember Mum saying, look, it was happened. There was a couple of people that knew how to give, obviously, to help with birthing. They had to be really quiet about it because of the fact that if they found out they knew how to do things like that, they would have been killed. That's why it was all very quiet. Mum said she couldn't make a noise during childbirth because of the fact that if people, the Khmer Rouge, found out or heard about it, then they would have came and executed everybody. So I was born from a bag of fish. So you wouldn't believe it, but yeah, the reason why I'm here today was a bag of fish. But at the time, look, they still didn't know, look, we needed to get out of there because the Khmer Rouge was still coming through. And if there was even wind of Dad being seen or known that he was educated, he would have been executed. So, and I keep saying it was not just him; he would have taken the whole family, and we would have all died. So, so they've decided we have to go to the Thai border to the refugee camps in Thailand.
And did your uncles and aunties go with you? Or?
Yes, they did. So everyone was my grandma ended up staying with my auntie, and a couple of the uncles stayed back because they were farmers. So they said, look, we're going to stay and look after grandma. And so they stayed back. So it was a turning point in obviously Mum and Dad's life to say, right, we don't know if we'll ever see you again, but we've got to go.
And did they survive?
So they did. So grandma and the uncles and the aunties, they survived. I remember going back and seeing them later down in the story. So Mum and Dad, my other uncle, they decided to run with us. During that time, you had to get porters to get you from Battambang to the border because the border was riddled with landmines. So Cambodia is still riddled with landmines. There's a lot of work, obviously, now to get rid of landmines. And so you had to actually pay these porters who knew the way to get through these landmines. Otherwise, you would have died. Unfortunately, a lot of porters took a lot of families through the landmines themselves so they could actually steal their belongings, which is really sad. So a lot of families obviously died because of that. So you really needed to trust this person and pay them in gold or in jewelry or whatever they could to make sure they took you through to the border without actually getting rid of you. So
how do you choose who's honest and reliable? And
that's why we're so lucky. I just think sometimes there were so many things that happened for us that allowed us to get to where we are today.
And lucky your mum had the jewellery sewed into
jewelry,
the clothes.
There were so many times where I say, we could have died. And there were so many times that we shouldn't have been here. But there was someone looking after us. Lucky enough, we had the right porter. And we got to the Thai border. And Mum says to me, when we got to the Thai border, they had to actually get through the fence without being detected. So with the Thai border themselves, they were only letting certain people in at the same time. So they had to wait until these patrol cars actually got around, and as they went around, they had to try and crawl under the fence and get under the fence to get into the camps because they wouldn't process you just like that. There was a time when they got to the border, the family got through, and then Mum came through and she got stuck in the fence. Because she'd just given birth, she was obviously a little bit bigger in the tummy, and she was stuck in the fence.
And carrying you probably.
And yeah, obviously newborn.
Yeah.
And so the patrol car was coming through, and they were just dragging her. The people that were with us, my uncles and all sorts, were just dragging her, trying to get her through this fence, because if they got caught in the fence, they would have been shot by the patrol car. They had to just drag her through this fence and just get her through, and eventually got her through before the patrol car actually got round to back again. So got into the actual refugee camps and settled in. So,
well, how long were they on the run for? How many years did that take to get to the border?
2 or 3 years. Coming into now, we're probably looking at 1979, 1980 in the camps. So I was born in 78, a couple of years, and now we're in the refugee camps, settling in the refugee camps for a year or so.
And what was life like in those camps?
Very different, very hard. It wasn't just a simple refugee camp where it was safe. So the story I'm about to tell you was another story of obviously survival again and near miss death again. We were in, basically they set up little tents for everybody in the camps, and so every family has their own little tent. And I remember one night Mum was telling me that my brother woke up to a man in the tent, and he said, "Oh, is that Dad? Is that Dad?" And so Mum woke, and all of a sudden there was this scurry, and this guy had taken some papers and ran out of the tent. And Mum was like, "Oh, that was a robber. He's taken our papers." So my little mum, like she's tiny, she ran after him because this guy had obviously stolen our papers, which was papers to get to Australia. So he was trying to steal our identity. So he'd taken off, Mum's taken off, and so she's notified the actual officials that our papers have been stolen, rah, rah, rah. They've moved us. They've moved us from one tent to another tent because they were like, "Oh, look, we'll move you because it's not really fair that you had your papers stolen," and all sorts. Anyway, the next night we found out there was a new family that went into our tent. This guy had come back and executed the whole family. So he was trying to steal, obviously, the identity by executing the family, so the family will not then take those papers and use them for the actual journey to Australia. So this poor family,
that is lucky for you guys.
yes. So this poor family was executed in our place. Again, it's just that whole family. Like it would have been every one of us at that time. It would have been me, my two older brothers, Mum and Dad, and my little brother was actually born in the refugee camps. So,
all right, let's talk about ages for all of you at this stage. So you were 2.
Yeah.
Your older brothers were
4 and 6.
And your youngest was newborn.
Newborn. Literally the 4 boys and Mum and Dad. So we were lucky enough to get a ticket out to Australia. We were sponsored out to Australia, given the green light. My uncles were sent to France, so we had to say goodbye. So they basically, you were given whatever you could and you took whatever you could at the time to get out of that place.
Did your parents tell you how they felt when they got given those papers to go to Australia?
I think it was a sense of relief and a sense of, how do you sort of, it's getting out of this hellhole, but and getting out of basically running and getting shot at and surviving everything they'd seen, and then going to somewhere they don't even know about. I guess if you put yourself in that perspective, what do you expect? You don't know what to expect, but just to get us out of here because
anything's better than where we are right now.
Absolutely. So
you said that your mum was held at gunpoint at one stage, and you said there were numerous times that happened. When was another time? She told you any other stories about even the mass graves that they saw?
Yeah, look, the stories where Mum said like they camped in a little home one night and it was pitch black, and the next morning, like Mum put me in a little hammock, and the next morning everyone was sleeping on the ground. Next morning they woke up, the whole house was full of dead bodies. You slept with dead bodies for the night and you didn't even know it.
Oh, because you arrived at night.
At night, and there was no light and there was no torches or there was no fire, because if you had any lights or torches or fire, the Khmer Rouge would actually know you're there and they'll come and hunt you down. Everything was basically in the dark, and to wake up to something like that would be just horrific. So there were so many of those stories of survival that I could go on forever. Hence why the book would be something I want to put down and do for that reason.
Because you are writing this book with your mum.
Correct.
Yeah.
I'm sitting down and interviewing my mum at the moment and putting the pieces together. And I think it's good for her and it's good for everyone, and it's also the legacy I want to leave for my kids and my kids' kids, and also for everyone to read and be a part of and see the journey of survival.
Your brothers, what are their memories like of that time?
They do sometimes talk about it. I know it does still. I know my oldest brother talked about, a simple thing, but he had a spoon that he had around his neck, and it was the spoon that fed him, and he lost it, and he was devo. It's a simple little symbol of, you think a spoon is what feeds you. A little simple spoon is actually one little thing that was his thing, which was his icon, and he lost it, and it traumatized him for losing a spoon.
Staying alive is one thing, and being fed and having enough food, especially how many children your parents had to keep alive, and a newborn. But then there's also the risk of disease and sickness and being on the run for that long, and then being in a refugee camp for 2 years after that amongst so many people.
So my second oldest brother had that issue. We went through a stage where he couldn't pee for days. From what I can see, he probably had a urinary tract infection from what it was. And I remember Mum telling the story. He was in so much pain for days. He couldn't actually pee. And this was out in the middle of the jungle. Like, if he didn't go to the toilet in the next 24, 48 hours after peeing, he would have died. And Mum said to me, look, there was one night where he was in so much pain. It was pretty much the last resort. He's going to die. She dreamt of something. Something came to her in a dream, told her to go to find this plant, got to do this to the plant and everything else. And it was all a natural sort of thing. So she went the next morning, found all these things that she found in her dream. Like, it was almost like a miracle sort of thing. And she had to crush it up and everything, grind it up, and he drank it. And the next day he went to the toilet. So moments of miracles happen so many times where Mum would dream something. And, even to the point where one night she was told, don't go and follow these people, you'll get executed. So there were times in the journey, during the actual journey through survival, through the jungle, where she dreamt of things, and they came to her and said, look, don't go here, don't do this, don't do that. And she followed it. And the whole time, the people who went that way were executed. So she was told to go this way and still survive. So we were very blessed. And I think in a way we were meant to get here. We were meant to survive, to get here, to make an impact and to do something with our lives. And I guess, everything happens along the way for a certain reason. And I keep looking at that, and it's through this whole journey that things like that happened. And I keep saying to you, we should have died so many times over, but we managed to keep surviving.
You got on that plane.
Yep.
You made it to Australia. And what year are we talking here?
So I remember Mum telling me the story. Flew in to Sydney. They set up a little refugee gymnasium where there were beds, there was food. Mum had never seen so much food in her life. There was so much meat on the barbecue and all sorts. And when she went through the line, she started putting away some food in her jacket or in her top, thinking like she's never going to see this food again. And she remembered telling me that the guy at the table said, "Oh, look, it's okay. There's so much more. So don't worry about stashing away the food. There's plenty more." And when that happened, I think it was that realization that it was going to be okay. We don't have to, stash away food for survival anymore. Things are going to be okay. And it was a turning point for her, that realization of it's going to be okay and we're safe. Yeah, we flew into Sydney, and then obviously from there we flew into Adelaide. We stayed in the monastery, the good old church monastery in Glen Osmond as refugees. We stayed there for a while, and I remember growing up there for probably 6 months, just living in the quarters there. So
you have memories of that? That was your
first? I do, and
is
photos.
That your first memories?
Yes, pretty much.
Yeah.
Photos of us in the monastery with pretty rugged clothes and all sorts, and anything that was donated, we were dressed in. It didn't matter because we had clothes. We were happy. Just to have normal clothes was great, and a shelter. So obviously coming to a brand new country, at the time, Mum and Dad were. It was sad because they told the story of we had sponsored families, like families who took in refugees and looked after them, things like that. Anyway, one of the sponsored families took Mum and Dad out and us. There was four kids out to a farm, and they said, "Oh, this is where you and your family are now going to live and work."
So he couldn't teach because limited English and everything. Okay, right.
So yeah, they were like, "Oh, this is what you're going to do. You're going to be farming, and you're going to be doing this, your kids and you." And Dad was like, "Oh, but we thought we came to a country of freedom and a country of education for my kids and all sorts." And at the time, this person obviously abuses the situation, and we're trying to use the refugees as slave labour in Australia, like you wouldn't have think. But they took us to a farm, and they were like, "Oh, you're going to work here, you're going to do this, and this is what you're going to do for the whole time." And Dad was like, "Oh, this doesn't seem right." So he sort of said, "Oh, look, this is not for me and my kids. This is not fair. We came to a safe country." Anyway, he notified people when they were...
Good on your dad.
Yeah, pretty brave. It was pretty... He's gone through to hell and back.
Yeah.
He didn't, he wanted to make sure his kids were looked after. So anyway, we were lucky enough to then be transported back to Adelaide and then were given housing trust homes. We put into a housing trust home, and then people sort of helped us out in terms of what to do, how to get to places, buses, and even just shopping and things like that, to go from a country of, from one place to a brand new society, limited English and just so daunting. It was very, very hard for them at the start. They were lucky they had a community of other refugee Cambodians around them. So they were able to talk and chat and find out, obviously, how to survive in Australia. So Dad went to do some market gardening, picking fruit, pruning and all these sort of things as part of the labour. He was an unskilled person, so he couldn't use his teaching degree because he was a Khmer teacher, and so he couldn't really use those skills as such. So he did that for years, and I remember him getting up really early in the morning, coming back late at night each night, and just exhausted. And
was there time to learn English? Did he go and do English courses?
Yeah, so he, as part of that, working and then trying to fit in that as well as the kids. And Mum always stayed home and looked after us kids, and we were always well fed. And so in between that, Dad obviously was able to do a little bit of teaching at a school, some Khmer teaching, a lot of Khmer kids who obviously were other refugee kids as well, in Mansfield Park and Ferren Park and Angle Park is where we resided, and it was a pretty rough neighbourhood. Obviously, the housing trust. And
what happened to give you that?
I guess it was a low socio-economic area. There was obviously a lot of unemployment around the area. There was a lot of drugs. There was a lot of families who were very broken. I remember growing up as a kid, and we used to always see the police in our street every week, every night.
So it wasn't the idyllic neighbourhood where you could ride your bike and be safe on your street.
No. So, at the time, I guess Mum and Dad were so busy. Dad was off work. We walked to school, walking through some of these neighbourhoods. Pretty scary.
What was school like for you? Where did you go to school?
We went to school at Mansfield Park Primary School. Pretty rough, I think. It was at the time, it was pretty hard because obviously there was a lot of refugees coming through, a lot of Asian refugees, a lot of Vietnamese and Cambodians, and there was a real shift in the society in terms of not wanting refugees, and so I remember seeing a lot of signs around saying Asians out, or, a lot of racism around the area. And I guess as kids growing up, you didn't know why. Why is it that they don't want us here? If they even knew half of what we've gone through, maybe they could understand. But I think it's that society just not understanding, and just a shift in society, and just thinking, all these people are going to come and take our jobs, or all these people are going to come and do these things, and but not understanding what or why they've fled or where they've come from.
Was there bullying at school?
Oh, there was always bullying at school and racism at school, and at the time you see a lot of movies and all sorts with a lot of racism and things like that as well, and you just go, oh yeah, this happens in our school. But we were pretty resilient kids, so we've been through war and back. That was nothing to us. So I was like, oh, this is nothing compared to what we've seen and what we've experienced. And a big part of our lives, I guess, was the fact that we were lucky enough at this stage now. My little sister was born in Australia. So the 5 kids, we were pretty much, we really played a lot together. And it stopped us, I guess, getting influenced to playing with a lot of kids who were influenced into drugs or alcohol or not going to school and things like that. And Dad was always very, very strict on, education is the key to get out of this poverty cycle. And so he kept drumming that into us, guys. If you want to get out of this is not what we want to live in. We came from, a society where, Dad was the principal of the school. We lived a great life. We don't want to, sit here poverty for the rest of your life. So you need to go and get educated. You need to break out of the poverty cycle. Otherwise, you'll end up like your friends in jail. It was a reality check for us, and it was good because it taught us to keep focused and keep pushing towards education, go on the study. And, they sacrificed everything for us to go to school. They never, ever had a house, and they never had a fancy car. They put everything they earned into education, and if it was tutoring, it's, putting us through extra tutors to get us so that we would get better at what we do.
How was your English? When did you really master the English language?
We were lucky being kids. We picked it up really, really well. Like, people would talk to me on the phone, they go, oh, I didn't even think you were Cambodian. But, our English we were lucky. We were surrounded by, we went to church, and it was funny because Dad, being a Buddhist and Mum being Buddhist, they knew that coming to a new society, they wanted us to have some sort of direction, and being Catholics, they thought was at least giving us some sort of values and some sort of direction, even though they were Buddhists. And so they said, look, you need to go to church, you need to be good to people, you need to have some direction in society in terms of leading that way. And so eventually they actually converted from Buddhism to become Catholics too. So massive shift, but I can see such a resemblance in the Buddhist religion to the Catholic religion as well. So massive shift for them, and a great shift for us and going forward.
Because that then led on to your education.
Exactly.
At secondary school.
Yeah. Growing up in this crazy childhood of just so much crime and drugs and everything around us, we were still led through the church, through going to, we went on some youth group camps and things like that. So we really learnt to really bring out some skills and social skills as young refugee kids. Like you don't really, you want to get involved with society and know society. We did readings at church, which built a lot of confidence in our public speaking. So when I look back now, I used to do a reading every week at church, and when you sit in front of 100 people as a 13-year-old trying to do a reading, it was scary. It was so scary, but it just built so much confidence into what I've become now, and even through later in my secondary schooling. So as we progressed through church, we were lucky enough to come across a lady, a very special lady, Sister Catherine. So Sister Catherine was a massive key to getting us into the next phase of secondary school. So from Mansfield Park, there was really either going to a public school and continue on our education, which is totally fine. But Dad knew he wanted a really good school for us. He pushed for a really good school. He didn't care how hard he had to work to get us to a good school. Anyway, Sister Catherine was able to tee us up with Christian Brothers College in Adelaide. Pretty prestigious and pretty an expensive school, but she was able to do a deal with the headmaster at the time, Brother Marks, that these kids, refugee kids, please give them a concessional scholarship or something so they can go to this school. So I remember she met with him so many times to really push for these poor kids who have just come through this war-torn experience. And at the time he was, he eventually gave the green light.
So it took a while. It wasn't something that he...
No, so my older brother went
because was he worried that it would set a precedent?
Yeah. My older brother had to go to Woodville High School for a couple of years while this was happening. Eventually, he was able to get the green light to go. So he did year 11 and 12 at Christian Brothers. And so my second oldest, he was able to go from year 8. And I was able to go from year 8 as well. So, and then my little brother was able to go from year 8. So he set the scene and we were able to attend Christian Brothers, which was like the biggest achievement my dad wanted, in terms of he knew that education again was the key for these kids to actually do something with their lives.
What about your sister? Did she get to go to a private
school? So
she
went to St. Dominic's, which is a private school too.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, not just the boys.
No. So we were very lucky in the fact that we were able to get in with the church, which obviously gave us the ability to get a concessional rate into some really good private schools.
The best decision, the best push that he could have possibly done for you kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ended up being a big success for you in particular, I understand.
Massively. So we went through, obviously I went through all of my high school. The biggest turning point for me in high school was I did year 13. So I went in through up to year 12, and then I did year 13 because I didn't want to be an architect. Year 12, I got into architecture, and I was like, nah, my oldest brother's an architect. I don't want to be an architect. I want to be something different.
So you didn't know what you wanted to do. You just didn't want to be an architect.
No, that's right. I just put it down, and I just thought, I got into architecture. I don't want to be an architect. So I thought, well, for 1 year, why not go back and repeat and just this is going to change my life if I don't. So I was like, grin and bear it. All my mates are going to uni. I'm going to go back to school. So I did year 13, obviously another year of school fees. Mum and dad, they didn't care. They were like, if you want to go back to school, go back to school. We want you to do what you want to do and achieve what you want to achieve. Again, they worked their butt off to obviously put me through year 13. And year 13 was the biggest change and shift in my whole schooling. All throughout year 8 to year 12, I was part of the SRC, Student Representative Council. But year 13, I became school captain, which I spoke to you about yesterday. It was such a shift in the fact that the poorest kid came to this school and is now leading the school as their school captain. No kid knew about it. No kid at that school knew I was the poorest kid at school.
They didn't know your history at all?
No, nobody did. So for me, it was just that turning point to go, if the poorest kid can come to the school and now lead a school through as a school captain, any of these kids could do the same. When I spoke at assemblies, it was through the years of speaking at church which brought the confidence to speak at, 400 or 500 kids, speaking into big openings, we spoke in front of governments and all sorts at openings of the various school grounds and things like that. But it gave me confidence to think, wow, I was once nothing at this school. I was once this poor kid who really didn't even have a uniform. When we got to the school, the uniforms were pretty much donated to us.
So you got there because the students voted for you to be there?
Correct.
Yeah.
The students basically voted to want me to be their leader in this prestigious school, to then have your name on the honour board to say, now you're the school captain. What
did your mum and dad think? They must have been so
blown
proud.
Away. They were blown away to go, wow, you achieved this. So it was quite a turning point. From that year, obviously, I got into the course I wanted to get into. So pharmacy was one of the things I put down, and pharmacy is what I got into. I met it with a lot of school heads. I spoke to a lot of officials. I got into networked really well with a lot of people, and that's where I guess I learnt to go, wow, it's so important to listen to so many people and to network with so many people because you can learn so much. And so having that, obviously, I spoke to the principal. I was sitting in the principal's office meeting with him pretty much weekly. And this is like, when you think about, you turn back the clock to go, this principal was once the principal that actually approved for this poor kid to actually come to the school.
Yeah.
And you just think, down the track, here we are sitting and having our meetings with each other, with the head of school and the principal.
Did the kids all know your history by the time you left? Did you reveal everything in that year?
Not really, and I don't think they still do. So I think this is really good for a lot of my mates through school and through class to now listen to this podcast and go, oh my God, I didn't even know. Why
did you keep it to yourself?
I think there was always that thought of what would my mates think of this kid, this poor kid who really didn't have much, because a lot of the families were wealthy, and you're always conscious of thinking, what do your mates think of you if you do have nothing? And as a teenager at the time, you're always, I didn't ever want my mates to come to my house because I lived in a housing trust home. You always went to their houses because they'll have pools and tennis courts and all sorts. So you're always conscious of, of what you have. And I know when you look back on now, it's pretty sad, but as kids and as teenagers, you're always worried about how you were judged. And that was a big part of why, I guess, I never told them my history and where we came from and what we were like at home.
Were you ashamed?
Probably. Yeah, probably ashamed for the fact that, my parents basically worked on the market gardens and lived in a housing trust home. We drove a pretty old car. You go to tennis on the weekends and their mum and dads will come and pick them up in their fancy cars and you catch the bus home. So, but it also has now made me think about my future with my kids and how I see myself with them and the time I spend with them too.
So you don't have the tennis court, the fancy car, or do you want that for your kids?
I think at a time in my life maybe, but not yet.
It's a pretty amazing story so far, isn't it? The next episode will feature how Tim has grown his pharmacy empire across the Mid-North and how he met his partner Megs and his integral work on building the non-government organisation New Hope Cambodia. I'll keep you in suspense for a couple of days. It'll be out shortly. In the meantime, head to Voice at SA's Insta and Facebook page where you'll see some pictures of young Tim with his family taken at the refugee camp in Thailand and his family today. I'm Annabelle Homer. Catch you soon with the next instalment.